Okay, so it's 10:30, and I decided to try live streaming today. There's no one on yet, at least not that I can see, but I thought I'd say hello and describe what I'm doing for those who will watch the replay, um, you know, maybe in the future. But basically, I started this YouTube channel to share my journey from clinical work to preventative work. I am a psychiatrist, that's my primary specialty. I'm a medical doctor who specialized as a psychiatrist. And then I did a few other things along the way that I can go into later. But more recently, I have felt, I don't know whether I'd say that my purpose is to be working in prevention, right? To come into the cycle, the mental health cycle, a little earlier, not waiting until people get ill and come to see me in hospital, but potentially intervening earlier in the game. So I am doing a number of things as I try to transition from a clinical career to a preventative mental health career. And one of those things is trying to communicate my experience of trying that prevention. And yesterday, I had a bit of a career chat with a lovely medical student who is very interested in both prevention and mental health. So basically, preventative mental health. And right now, there is no particular specialization in preventative mental health as a residency pathway in the UK, at least. I've not heard of one elsewhere in the world, but in the UK, there isn't any. But preventative mental health has been made a more comprehensive part of the training of resident doctors who are going through a psychiatry specialization. And there are a number of other ways you can get preventative mental health expertise. And so I shared with her my journey and some of the options that might be open to her since she's so early in her career, right? The world is her oyster. She can do lots of things in order to work in preventative mental health. And after that career talk yesterday, I was listening to some video or the other on YouTube, and there was something about going live. And I thought, why don't I go live today and see how it works, right? Have a chat with whoever turns up, if anybody turns up, about career, about life, about preventative mental health, about, thriving, about challenges, about whatever might come up. So that's why I decided to go live today. So I'll just putter around to. Okay, so Susan, you want me to chat a bit about preventative mental health? Um, Basically, it's about two things. It's about preventing mental ill health and promoting mental well-being. Now, preventing ill health, as those in public health or who have done some public health will know, there can be primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary, quaternary, and it goes on. And there's even primordial at the other end. The idea being that you can either prevent a person or a population from being likely to develop sorry, somebody said, what does this mean? What are you asking about? Okay, I'll go on talking about preventative mental health. Please just put any clarification about what you want in the chat. So basically, you can prevent a person from getting a mental illness at various points, right? You can do it, you can create a population, a society, and build it up in a certain way that the people in that society are less likely to develop certain mental illnesses, right? That's intervening very early in the mental health life cycle, right? Because the community is built and established in such a way that people are not even likely to experience things that put them at risk of anxiety and stress. Otherwise, you can put things in place in particular settings, like you can have schools that are more mentally healthy, or workplaces, or places of worship, just structure life in a way that's healthier. That is also preventative mental health. Or you can do it by, interventions in schools. I'm sure you know about how schools today are more sensitive about mental health than they were years ago. We might have school counselors, school psychologists, and so on. But then there are also a lot of the interventions I've talked about are more the group type of interventions, but you can also intervene on an individual level, right? There are things you can do to support individuals to be less likely to develop an illness. Now, you've heard me talk about prevention. I've talked about, how you can do prevention where you even make a person in a society less likely to be mentally ill because of the society they've grown up with and because and how it's structured, or people in certain workplaces. You've heard of probably mentally healthy workplaces, or certain schools. Children do better there. And then I've talked about individual interventions. However, if despite all this, the person now develops a mental illness, there are still things you can do by intervening early to make a person less likely for that mental illness to become worse. And the truth is that a lot of us who work in healthcare are already doing some form of preventative mental health, whether we know it or not. When a person presents to their GP surgery, right? And Susan, you would know about this. When a person presents to a GP surgery and talks about being stressed, or they come in with a headache and there's no discernible, organic cause, right? But they just seem really stressed. They've got a headache. You take their blood pressure. It's not high enough for it to be a serious worry, but elevated compared to their normal range, and they just seem a little unsettled. The interventions that many of our GPs put in place at that point, right? It might be, encouraging them to take some time off or to restructure their lives, or just some supportive, or, you might even get them to see your GP psychological support worker, if you've got one of those. And some of those early interventions might make the person less likely to develop a full-blown psychiatric illness that needs a full course of treatment, either on an outpatient basis or an inpatient basis. So you can also prevent by things you do by intervening early in the mental ill health life cycle, right? But they've already started to be sort of I think what we call it prodromal or something. And then for people that end up on admission with proper mental illnesses, there are still things for even somebody that is, having an acute episode of, whether it's an acute episode of a depressive illness, maybe they've got a personality disorder and they've had some triggers, and things have been exacerbated and things are all over the place. They're thinking of hurting themselves, or they've actually been hurting themselves, or a person with a psychotic illness or bipolar. Even if we admit such a person and have to treat them and even potentially section them, there are still ways that we can manage these people that make them less likely to come in again and again, and make the current illness less likely to become extremely severe, right? Some of the things that we would do, for instance, you might have heard that when we're treating older people, we try and make sure, especially somebody with like a delirium, we try and make sure there's not too much change around them, right? We try and make sure they're in a room where everything is familiar around them. We try and make sure, they have maybe the same healthcare professionals, and there's no too much flickering of lights on and off. It's a dim environment. It's just a predictable, safe environment, because that makes the person less likely to be triggered by all the changes going on. That's an example of how you can put some interventions in place for a person on a mental health ward. Unfortunately, mental health resources, including human resources, are quite scarce. So many times you just take who you see on your inpatient ward. But ideally, you would make sure that the person has almost the same team managing them throughout their time in hospital, right? And that there's an excellent care package for them as they go home, where they are completely supported. Not that they go home and they're struggling and the crisis team was not able to visit, and maybe, other things you put in place, they just, did not happen. We've got this thing called recovery colleges at trusts all around the UK. And they have different supportive preventative interventions that are not clinical. They're not the clinical model that many of us physicians and healthcare people are used to, but it's more a supportive third sector type approach But I really encourage clinicians to think about optimizing the benefits we have through those by making sure that patients, when they're being discharged, are aware of things like recovery colleges, because there you get to meet peers who have been through many of the psychiatric conditions people are going through and have gotten better and are now able to support each other. So there are a variety of things you could do that count as preventative mental ill health. Sorry, that count as preventative health or mental illness. Another thing you can do is if a person is on certain medicines, there are interventions and initiatives you can put in place to make sure that the side effects of that treatment are mitigated, right? Some of our psychiatric medicines, they can cause people to gain loads of weight. Some of them can cause people to, just experience a number of things. Now, one of the ways you can almost be preventative is make sure you involve the patient in your decisions, right? So it's patient-centered care. So you don't put them on a medicine that they hate and they're not consistent on. But if you involve them in the conversation and the patient says, oh, this medicine you told me about, it causes weight gain, I don't want it. This other one, it has sexual side effects, I don't want it. But that one, it seems to have the least side effects. Yes, it might not work as fast as the others, but it has the least side effects. That's the one I want. Now you're involving the patient in the treatment, care and treatment discussion. And so the patient is more likely to stay on those medicines longer, which means the person is not likely to relapse in the next few weeks and end up in hospital again, right? And so there are a number of things we can do at various stages in the treatment. But I'll stop there and ask, um, am I answering your question, or is there anything else specific you would like to know? And while you're thinking about that, I'll just keep chatting and say that honestly, in terms of prevention, we can intervene in various ways. Someone else, I think it was on TikTok, because I try and post videos on TikTok too, not as often as I should, but I try. Someone was asking me that is prevention purely clinical, or can you do it, as a non-clinical thing? And I said, honestly, prevention is different things. You can come at preventative mental health from various angles. You can do it as a psychiatrist like me, but many of our GPs, like I said earlier, are doing some form of preventative mental health. It might be part of a comprehensive package, but they're doing it. You can do preventative mental health as a researcher, right? By, looking into, causes of things, availability of things, researching what's going on, and so on. Oh, Susan, you say you don't know about recovery colleges. Oh my goodness, they're amazing. Um, I don't know the trust local to you. I think it might be, but whatever trust, NHS trust is local to you, right? When next you're at work, or if you can, if you can over the weekend. No, you shouldn't be working at the weekend, but you get my point. When next you can, just Google or check on the intranet about whether your trust has a recovery college. They tend to even have like semesters, and they have a curriculum where they describe the various. So they might say that, okay, for the next, throughout the season, like for the summer, we're going to have this schedule. So every Monday we'll have an anxiety group in the morning and a distressing walk in the afternoon. Then on Tuesday, we have art therapy classes in the morning, and you know dance therapy in the afternoon. On Wednesday, we have a peer support person who has lived with schizophrenia and is now thriving despite having to be on long-term medicines. He's coming to share his story. So there could be various things in the curriculum, and it's really planned. And in quite a few trusts that I've worked at, I have seen that there are recovery colleges. And you see, I'm so glad you're saying, you mentioned you don't know about it, because that makes me, and you're not the first person I've heard say so. I think because I've worked in mental health care, there are things I assume people know about, but they don't. And so I think I need to maybe add it to the things I encourage people to check out more often. Because I think when we discharge patients from hospital, or even when GPs see patients, I really don't know the eligibility criteria. I don't know whether, because I've always encountered them in inpatient care, I don't know whether outpatients or people who are under GP care and not under a community mental health team can access them. But if you have a patient who, for instance, is under a community mental health team and they're struggling, or they've just been discharged, and you find out that their local trust has a recovery college, honestly, I think it's worth, you know, checking it out and supporting them to access it. So thank you. I'm glad you asked that because um, I think something I'm learning is, yeah, you're welcome. And I am very grateful. Thank you. As you would know, we go to school for so many years, we study for so long, but at some point, the knowledge you've gained almost seems like it's common, like everybody knows it. And you don't realize that your area is so specialized or can be quite specialized. And while everybody in your small area might know about it, not everybody knows about it. I know that, Susan, we've had conversations where you've mentioned things to me, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know. You always send me helpful links. So I think this is helping me to maybe respect the knowledge I've gained along the way. So please ask me another question, Susan. Yeah. Now you've inspired me. I'm going. Welcome. Somebody else has joined. Please just say hello in the chat. Write your name. Let me know who is here. My name is Margaret, and I'm a psychiatrist who is doing preventative mental health. And I've just been talking about two things. The first one was Susan, who signed in earlier, asked about what is preventative mental health. And I was talking about how we can prevent a person from becoming mentally ill in a variety of ways. You can either do it at the group or the societal level, where we build communities that are healthier, right? That people who grew up in those communities or who work or who school in those, you know, settings are less likely to develop certain mental illnesses, right? Or even if a person develops a mental illness, if they become quite stressed or anxious, you know, even just before it gets really serious, there's still things we can do to prevent them from getting on admission. But if a person ends up on admission in hospital, right, for anxiety, for psychosis, for personality disorder, there's still things about the way we organize their care that will make them less likely to, you know, have multiple relapses or to even get more severe. So that's the first thing we're talking about. And then we were talking about that, I also mentioned recovery colleges. I'm not sure who has signed in or where you're from, but in the UK, and you might know more about this than me, so feel free to tell me if you do. We have this thing called recovery colleges, and Miss S was telling me that she didn't know about it, and I thought she knew about it, and so we talked about it a bit. And recovery colleges are these lovely peer-supported initiative where people who have been on admission and are being discharged can access almost like a curriculum that supports their mental health, but it's not that serious. It's not like school serious. It's more like their courses over the summer, their programs over the winter, and if you contact the recovery college, they can tell you, oh, we've got anxiety groups on a Monday, we've got art therapy on a Tuesday, we've got dance therapy on a Wednesday, we've got up here somebody who's lived with a mental illness and is now thriving despite his diagnosis coming to talk to us on a Thursday. You know, there are different things. Now, I will put my hand up and say I have never personally worked in a recovery college, but I do know that it is, I've interacted with them, I've sat in on their sessions, right? And I do think more and more people should know about these recovery colleges. And I think it's a fantastic model. Google it, Recovery Colleges UK. And I do think that those kind of initiatives contribute to people having better mental health, right? I think it contributes to people doing better in terms of their mental well-being. So do you have any question for me? I'll give you a few seconds and I'll take a drink while I'm waiting to see if you have any questions. If not, I'll talk a little bit about how I tie my interest in talking therapies with preventative mental health. So, you might know that I've also trained as a therapist, a talking therapist. My designation is cognitive analytic therapist. And it was something that I had always wanted to train as a therapist, right? And so I got the opportunity to do so alongside part of my psychiatry training, but I completed it after I finished. And why would somebody who likes preventative mental health be interested in talking therapy or psychotherapy? Now, when I say talking therapy or psychotherapy, it basically means, in the Hollywood movies, we tend to be depicted as shrinks, sitting with a patient on a couch and, trying to psychoanalyze them. And sometimes a number of people use the term shrink interchangeably for psychiatrists and therapists. Fortunately for me, I'm both a psychiatrist and a therapist. But I just wanted to give you a picture of what I mean when I say a therapist. When I say therapist. Now, why do I think talking therapy is relevant to preventive mental health? Because talking therapy is about using principles that optimize people's mental health. How do I know that? Partly because I've trained as one, but the other reason, which I've mentioned in one of my other videos, is that some therapy modalities, before you can become a therapist, you have to have therapy yourself, right? You have to be on the other side of the divide and be a patient and see a therapist for a certain number of weeks. And for me, I found that really useful. And I know that some of my colleagues who also um, attended the course found that useful. And basically, it showed us that there were patterns or things from our backgrounds that had become second nature to us, but were not really helpful to us. And none of us were on admission. None of us had any mental ill diagnosis as much as I knew, as far as I knew. But yet, going through therapy to meet a course requirement got all of us feeling that our lives had improved, at least, the people that I spoke to. And I know that that happened for me. And it got me to think, honestly, if I had the resources, I would encourage everyone to access talking therapy at some point in their lives because it helps us understand our patterns, why we do certain things that are not our favorite thing to do, and how we can, maybe live better lives. And so that's how I think talking therapy, that's part of how I think talking therapy links to preventative mental health. But another way is this, and I'm going to plug my consultancy now. You might know that I recently founded a consultancy. It's called the Mental Wellbeing. Oh, I keep mixing up the name. The initial name was the Mental Wellness and Wellbeing Consultancy, and I thought it was too long. So I shortened it to the Mental Wellness Consultancy. But half the time I forget, and instead of saying wellness, I say well-being. So anyway, I recently founded a consultancy, the Mental Wellness Consultancy. It's very new. We're still finding our feet and figuring things out. But part of what we offer is an organizational package where we can come to an organization, no matter how big or small. It could be an organization of 3 to 5 people, it could be an organization of hundreds of people. But our package is that we come to your organization and we offer a bespoke package, right? A package tailored towards your organization. So we don't just come and start doing sessions on stress management and burnout. Well, that's important, and we'll get to that at some point. We come and the first thing we do is a sort of mental health audit, right? We come spend a few days just getting to know the people that work there, the processes, the expectations, what are the things people are struggling with. And then based on those initial interactions, we come up with a profile of the organization, right? And like, okay, these are the things you guys do really well. These are the things regarding preventive mental health, regarding mental well-being. These are the things you could do better. And based on that profile, we now go ahead to offer a number of interventions. And the interventions will be at various levels. We can offer individual interventions where we have, if there are particular people that you think, honestly, this person is burnt out, they're always taking time off work. Before long, they're only taking a day or two now, and they're always stressed. Before long, they might, have to take significant time off. And so we can have one-to-one sessions with those kinds of people where we will use some of these principles from therapy to talk with them one-to-one and find out, okay, what's going on, right? How can we support you, and give those people an individual support that works for them. We can also, following that initial mental health audit of the organization, if we find out that, for instance, your accounts department, they're always stressed at the end of the month or whenever they do payroll. I don't think they wait till the end of the month. We get paid at the end of the month, but they sort out the stuff earlier. But whenever that is, they get really stressed, right? What we can do is we can say, okay, what really causes you to be stressed, right? And as we understand, because part of our mental health audit, we'd have gotten to understand the organization and so on. We can now say, okay, put an intervention in place for the payroll or your accounting team, right? That helps them to better manage their time, to be better aware of their triggers and their stresses, right? And to make sure that when it's that time of the month, they can manage their responsibilities without getting stressed. So that's part of what we can do. And then we can also do interventions for, high level individuals in the organization, directors, you know, managers, and people who have, challenges, maybe performance issues in terms of, these high stress jobs, right? Maybe there's so many expectations, they're managing so many teams, and they're just struggling to cope. We can put in place interventions that are tailored towards these high level executives. So you can see that we'll have interventions that could be for individuals, for departments, but also we can now do the stress sessions and the burnout sessions and things for the whole organization, right? We can take a few retreat days. Now, when we talk about a retreat, it depends on the organization and what you can afford. If you want an entire week's package where we take you away to a lovely nature preserved place where your team gets away from the day-to-day stress, right? And they go and they can de-stress and get, therapy principles in that time, have a number of sessions, right? We can organize that. We'll partner with some of these people who own lovely resorts and provide that kind of service. But if that's too expensive or your organization is much smaller, we can also do it in an afternoon. It doesn't have to be a week away, right? We can have an away day or an away afternoon where we go to a lovely, wooded place or a green place, right? And we just, step away from the work environment and do some healthy mental well-being, wellness practices. And so those are just some examples of the preventative mental health interventions we can put in place for organizations or corporate bodies. Now, if you check my bio, you will see that there I have a list of, I think, my various social media platforms, but also I think there's a Calendly link where people can book sessions with me. And there's a session for individuals, there's a session for organizations, but there's also, I think, an option for people who want a bespoke package, right? And we have a conversation about what we could offer you depending on your specific organization's needs. So that's some of what we can do. So I'll just quickly check one or two things. I'm not going anywhere, don't worry. So I think part of what I'm learning about life is that you're supposed to be able to talk quite a bit. So now that I've taken a little breather, I'm going to talk about another angle of preventative mental health, and that's the economics. One way I approach certain things that are important to me or that I'm passionate about is to remind myself that they're not important to everybody, right? I might love preventative mental health, I might love talking therapy, I might be willing to talk about it all day and all night, and that's okay. Everybody doesn't have to love the same things I do. However, when I'm making a case for some of these things, I try and tell people why it might be relevant to them. So, preventative mental health might not be your thing, but it might be relevant to you. Why? Because economically and societally, it makes sense for people to prioritize prevention in mental health. Why? Research has shown that there are not enough mental health professionals in the world, even in the most resourced countries. there are not enough mental health professionals at the various levels, right? From the most senior mental health professionals to the auxiliary ones, right? We're all doing great jobs at various levels, but there are not enough of us. Go to any country in the world, they will never tell you, oh, we have enough psychiatrists, we have enough mental health nurses, oh, we've got absolutely enough psychologists. In fact, you can take our extra psychologists. No, mental health professionals are not enough anywhere in the world. In fact, a few years ago, the World Health Organization, the WHO, instituted what they call the MH-GAP. And the MH-GAP program is um, about the fact that everywhere in the world, there is a gap between the ideal and the available in terms of um, mental health staffing. And because there is that gap, the World Health Organization has tried to find ways to make sure people are maximizing other approaches to providing for people's mental well-being. You know, not just saying, okay, we're going to wait till we have enough psychiatrists, we're going to wait till we have enough psychologists. No, we're never going to have enough psychiatrists and psychologists, right? Or at least not for a while. So what we can do is to make sure we either, do some task shifting and upskilling of people. There's this fantastic intervention in one of the Z countries. I say Z countries because I always mix them up. Apologies to the people from those countries. But I think it's Zimbabwe, where a psychiatrist called Dixon Chibanda and a number of other fantastic people have worked on and really built an intervention called the Friendship Bench, where they work with grandmothers in communities to provide supportive mental health care. And so that's the kind of thing, at least, that I think that the WHO was talking about when they encouraged people to think about other ways to take care of the mental health gap. Now, because there's this mental health gap, and because research has shown that as think about the next few years, right? People that do modeling and that sort of thing. In the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 50 years, what is the population going to be? What are the demographics going to show, right? How many mental health professionals are we going to need, right, in the next few years? And do we have the resources or the plans in place to provide it? And honestly, it doesn't seem like we're going to have all the resources in terms of human resources to meet people's mental health needs. So what do you do with that kind of problem? Personally, I know I don't have all the answers, and I'm, just trying to work in my own corner of preventative mental health. As somebody who is a clinician, a psychiatrist, a therapist, a public health person, and, now trying to combine all those into a preventative mental health career, I would think, I would agree with people that say that we need to focus more on prevention. But while we're focusing on prevention, we also need to make sure that we're building up our staffing levels, right? We're putting workforce plans in place so that staffing levels are improved, or at least somewhat near adequate as time goes on. And this intervention will be different for different countries, for different settings. But there need to be workforce plans that anticipate the demographic changes that are coming, so that in the next few decades, we're not having the same complaints about struggling healthcare systems that we seem to be having in many countries of the world now. So that is one intervention that can be put in place, right? Let's see if we can increase the number of psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health nurses, support workers. But in addition to that, we also need to think about, can we intervene earlier in the mental health cycle? What can we do to make sure that we try to reduce the numbers of people who develop a mental illness in the first place? How can we shift the curve or the percentages or what, so that fewer people are developing these mental illnesses that end up needing psychiatrists and psychologists? Okay, we can put certain interventions in place. Now, there are a number of fantastic published papers, and I know not everybody who ends up watching this or rewatching this is going to be an academic, but there are a number of fantastic research papers that show that if you invest a pound or a dollar in a preventative mental health intervention, right, it gives you a fantastic return on investment. Now, the return on investment is different for different interventions. There are returns on investments for, preventative measures put in place for people with conduct disorders, or people, things around anxiety, or parenting interventions. There are different, returns on investment for different conditions. But going back to what I started with, that why should you bother about preventative mental health? You might be a lawyer, you might be an accountant, you might be, a politician. Why should you bother about preventative mental health? You should bother because it makes economic sense. You should bother because you or somebody you know could develop a mental illness, and it's important that we put in place the structures and the support to reduce the likelihood of that happening, or to have adequate support in place if that happens. And because people that you love, it might be your kid, it might be your relative, or your employee, somebody important to you might develop some struggles with their mental well-being. And so if we can put interventions in place to support prevention now, people are less likely to struggle a lot. So what I'll do is I'll increase the music a bit. I'm still here. I think there's no one right now, but thank you very much to all the people that have popped in, whether you popped in and stayed for a long time or popped in and stayed for a short time. Thank you very much. I'm just going to see if I can identify one of those papers I mentioned that talks about prevention. Hi there. Somebody's just signed in. I don't know whether you've been here before or not. Could you put your name in the chat so I know who it is? I'm just checking for an article that I wanted to tell people about. I already described part of it, and so I just thought I'd search for it and see if I can talk more. Yes, I think I found one or two of them. Hi, I'm not sure. Is it Susan? Susan, is it you or is it someone else? Okay, no, I don't think it's Susan. Sorry, please could you say hello or put your name in the chat? Also, oh, they've stepped away. All right, that's okay. So I'm going to talk, about some of the returns on investment that I was talking about, and I told you I'd try and see if I had some of the published papers nearby. So one of the papers is from the Lancet. If you're in our field, you will know stuff in the Lancet tends to be, high profile. So there's this article. It's more a commentary type of article, and it's the economic case for improved coverage of public mental health interventions, right? And this was published November 2017. And it goes on to describe things like you talk about school-based programs, right, which result in savings of £83 for each pound spent. Isn't that fantastic, right? That for every pound you spend on a school-based intervention, they're called school-based social and emotional learning programs for 10-year-olds to prevent conduct disorder. For every £1 you invest, you get 83 quid back. If there was any financial intervention that gave you that kind of return on investment, you probably would want to invest, right? Then there are also school-based interventions to reduce bullying, which result in £14 saved for each pound invested. So I do think it's worth it. Then in terms of secondary prevention of mental disorder, there are parenting interventions for conduct disorder, which result in about 7 quid savings for each pound spent. And this is from this article in the Lancet. The article is by Jonathan Campion and Martin Knapp from 2017. And this table that talk about economic, savings, it's conservative estimates of economic savings in England, and it's part of the England mental health strategy. Now, if you do early diagnosis and treatment of depression and anxiety disorder at work, it results in £5 savings for each £1 spent. So for each pound you invest, you save about £5. Now, suicide prevention through GP training results in about £43 plus saved for each pound invested. And then early intervention for people who are having a first episode of a psychosis. Each pound you each pound you invest in an intervention results in £17 saved. Isn't that fantastic? I do think it's great to treat people, right? I love spending time with my patients, right? In fact, my ideal healthcare system would be one where me and my patients, if somebody comes to see me for an outpatient appointment, a community mental health appointment, or in a therapy, and there are no time limits. We just sit down and chat, right? While I, use the principles I have learned over, a lifetime of training and specializing. But resources are limited. So sessions with patients are limited. But I guess I say that to confirm I'm not against treatment, right? I do think treatment is important. I do think we should invest in excellent treatment of our patients. But part of the challenge is that right now, a lot of the focus is on treatment. We need a little bit more focus on prevention. Because if for each pound we're investing, and I've just read out about a few of them, maybe 4 or 5, there are loads of these, there's research that shows that, in fact, I should probably do a separate um, video about it, right? So there's a lot that can be saved from investing in preventative mental health. But I've talked about preventative mental health quite a bit on this video. And I said that I was happy for people to talk about a variety of things. So let's see. What else could I talk about? I encourage people to come talk to me about career, life, well-being, preventative mental health, residency training, health, etc. Okay, so maybe that's what I'll talk about. Maybe I'll talk about a bit about career. And I'll piggyback on the conversation I had with a lovely medical student yesterday. And she was basically asking, how, do you specialize if you're interested in prevention and mental health? Now, right now in the UK, as far as I know, if you, a lot of what I'm talking about when it comes to career advice in this particular at this particular time is about doctors. But if you want to talk about career stuff and you're not a doctor, that's fine. I have also gotten experience in other fields that are adjacent, and some of these principles are transferable. But for now, I'll just talk about the doctor bit. Those are my primary constituency. And so if a person is in medical school or thinking about going to medical school, or you're even done with medical school, you're in FY1, FY2, you're doing your house job, or you've even started residency in something and you want to do preventative mental health, I'm going to talk about some of the options that I'm aware of. A lot of my examples might be UK centric because I live and work in the UK and that's where I did my residency training. Well, I do think that some of the principles I talk about are going to be transferable to other areas. Sorry, I'll just have my face a bit. So, what are the options? What are some options for building a career in preventative mental health? Okay, now, as doctors, one of the things, or the most popular way of specializing if you study medicine is to do a residency, or in the UK, as we call it, core training, specialty training, and to CCT, or to get a Caesar, you specialize. But more and more people are exploring alternative careers that do not require a residency. So while a lot of my examples might refer to residency, please know that I do not feel a person must do a residency. At some point in my life, I didn't want to do residency. I stepped away from the entire idea of residency training as a doctor. And in fact, I think it was good I did that because I think the time away from that, hyper structured residency environment helped me to breathe a bit career wise and then get to a point where I thought, okay, yeah, I should probably do residency. I think that's one of the ways to reach my career goals. So people will have different career goals, right? And your career goals might mean that you choose to do residency, but you don't have to do it. So let me share, maybe what I'll do is I'll share a bit of my story and then use that to talk about examples. So when I finished medical school, I was a little stuck because I liked prevention and I liked mental health. I liked public health, right? And I liked psychiatry. My psychiatry placement when I was in medical school at University of Jos, Nigeria, was my favorite placement as a medical student. And when I finished medical school, I liked both prevention, public health, and we called it, it was a community medicine posting. I think that's what we call public health when we're in med school. So I wanted to do both, but I knew I couldn't. At different points, I think at first I was thinking about a residency in public health when I was in Nigeria. But then I ended up, rather than a residency, I ended up working in a public health organization. It was an American organization doing some interventions in Nigeria. Now, at the time, I was looking for a public health organization to work in that was also doing mental health, but those were not very common, at least at that time, within my remit. However, what was common were public health organizations doing infectious diseases, virology, that sort of thing. And so I thought, okay, I might not be able to do a preventative healthcare role in mental health. Well, I've just finished medical school. I'm still, pretty green about most things. Why don't I take this job role? I learned the preventative health techniques. Yeah, it comes with virology and, that's not my cup of tea, but the prevention is something I'm interested in. So I'll, apply for the job. If I get it, great. And I'll do the role and learn as much as I can. And I did indeed do the role. Right, I applied for the role and I got it. And I worked in a public health role for nearly 3 years, I think. And honestly, it was very foundational for me in terms of my understanding a public health approach that was different from the clinical placements I had done as a medical student, and even some of the clinical work I had done after medical school. Because in Nigeria, after medical school, I had to do my house job, which is sort of equivalent to foundation year here in the UK. And then I did a service here. There's this National Youth Service Corps, which is compulsory for all Nigerian graduates below 30. And at the time, I was obviously below 30, not anymore. But it's compulsory and it's a year, and you go to some sort of service in a place that should be different from where you grew up or schooled or so, or that sort of thing. And I did mine in the southwestern part of the country. And so by the time I was thinking about this public health role, I had some clinical, experiences, but I wanted to build my public health skills. So I took that role, did it for nearly 3 years. I traveled all around Nigeria, right? At some point, we even went to Kenya for a training, and we were in Mombasa, and that was fantastic. I'd been saying I have to go back to Mombasa. But it was lovely. I learned a lot. Shout out to any of my colleagues from IHB AIDS Relief, if any of you ever watch this. I learned a lot, got to meet a group of lovely, fantastic people. And it was, I think, the right decision to take that role, even if it wasn't prevention and mental health. And then I was fortunate. I had an opportunity to come to the London School. The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine had been my dream school, all right? You think about prevention, a master's in public health. You think about, when you're thinking about top public health schools in the world, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine will be mentioned at some point. And initially, I was actually planning to go to, I think it was Leeds, but then somehow I also had admission to the London School, and I went to the London School. And my year at the London School was fantastic in many ways. I think the London School of Hygiene is a fantastic place to study at. They haven't asked me to promote them. They don't know I'm saying this, but I found it a very intelligent postgraduate environment, but which was also very supportive. Thank you, whoever's just logged in. You can put the name in the chat if you want to. But I had talked about what is preventative mental health earlier, and now I'm talking about my career journey. And so I did my year at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, got the master's. It was an MSc in public health promotion. And, there were some modules you could choose that you had some latitude to design your master's program the way you thought, worked for you. So for instance, I always say the way it was at that time, if you wanted to focus on epidemiology type modules, there was a way you could structure your master's regardless of what your primary focus was. And for me, I was interested in mental health, and there was a module on global mental health. It was run by, I think, the London School as well as King's College. And it was a lovely module. I was delighted to be doing global mental health, even if it was just that one module. And I made sure my research, my thesis for my master's focused on global mental health. And then after the master's, my initial plan was to come back to Nigeria, right? And something I tried to do as a human being, I try to be grateful. Now, some of you might have seen some of my other videos, and you might have seen that I mentioned that I live with a severe version of endometriosis. And it has come with so many challenges that sometimes I just say, okay, there's so many things that might be going wrong or that might be hard right now. I've got to look for the things I can be thankful for. So being thankful, gratitude is very important for me. Another thing I try to do is to share my wins, but I also try and share my not wins, things I didn't win at. And I got that idea from a few people on social media. I think there was somebody a few years ago who posted almost like a CV of all his failures. Now, this person was a fantastically successful person, but I think he posted a CV of all his failures. And the point was that he was sharing that, yes, he was now a fantastic success, but he'd had a lot of challenges along the way. So as I tell you my journey about, getting to this point where I'm doing preventative mental health to a degree, I'll share some of my not wins. So as I was coming to the end of my master's at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, I applied for a job with an organization that was basically doing, I think it was like a mixture of preventative mental health and global mental health in Nigeria at the time. For some reason, I don't think I knew about them when I was looking for the career, or a job like that a few years ago. But I had found out about them at some point in the time leading up to what I'm talking to. And so they were advertising for a role that I ticked quite a few of the boxes for. And I applied for the role. And while the job was in Nigeria, one of the leads in the organization was a British person. And so I think he was on holiday or he was visiting Britain for some reason or the other. And so we had our interview. I had the interview here in Britain in person in London. Um, and after the interview, I got feedback from him, and he said I did well. That in terms of public health, right, in terms of prevention, I was the best candidate, if I remember correctly. However, I hadn't done my residency training, and they needed somebody with residency training. And I was like, oh no, right? I was glad to hear I'd done well, but I was sad that I didn't have that, I don't know, feather in my, is it feather or arrow in my quiver or something that would have made me the standout candidate for the role. Over the next couple of years, I got involved in some research assistant work at King's College London. I think it was the Department of Health Services Research or something, with the fantastic now Professor Melanie Abbas. I got to do global mental health. I helped her with applying for grants. And I saw how it was possible to work on projects across a number of countries, to collaborate with different colleagues. And, I did some of it I did most of it as an honorary role. There was some paid work as well. But what it did for me was that following the masters, I was able to practice some of the things I had learned during this. I think it was a couple of years where I did this research assistantship type role at King's College London. Um, at some point while all this was happening, between the masters and then the 2 years following, I ended up having to have a couple of surgeries. So it wasn't all smooth sailing. But somehow, life went on. And while all that, was going on, I thought, why don't I consider a residency? I told you at some point I didn't want to do residency, right? I thought I was, no, 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 no. I'm not going to do that. And then I went for this interview where they wanted somebody who had done residency. But even separate from that, I just said, okay, it's not for me. Fine, I'll find another role. And I ended up staying back here in the UK. And one thing led to another. I wrote PLAB 1 and 2, and I passed. And I applied for psychiatry. And the funny thing was, when I applied for psychiatry, these rounds when you apply for it. I applied, there used to be, I think, round 1, round 2. And depending on when you applied, you could start residency at a certain time. Now, the August start is the main start, right? And it's the more highly populated start. So if you start your residency if you apply, I think in round 1 at the time, if you applied in round 1, you probably would start in August. And I think if you applied in round 2, you would start in February. So there were always 2 starts, August and February, for people doing psychiatry and a number of other residency trainings. Now, by the time I'd gotten all my ducks in a row, you've got to have various things to prepare your portfolio to be able to apply for residency. Now they write exams. I think it's called MSRA or something. There's an exam they write, now that psychiatry and other specialties, right? Then there weren't exams, but you had to have all your ducks in a row. You had to have done quite a few things in your portfolio to be able to apply. And remember, at that time, I was still I still am. I am an international medical graduate because I studied in Nigeria. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Jos, Nigeria. But choosing to do residency in the UK as a foreigner, a foreign doctor, a foreign trained doctor, meant that you had to prove that, or how, there was something called the resident market labor test. Basically, any organization hiring you had to show that they couldn't find a Brit or a European who had applied and was equally qualified, or something similar to that. Now, if I remember correctly, the person didn't even need to be better than you. They just needed to be qualified enough for the role. So if you and another person who was a Brit or a European, so somebody from the EU, happened to apply for that role, now even if that person was even if that person didn't have as impressive a portfolio as you, even if they didn't necessarily do as well as you, if they just did okay, because of the resident market labor test, I think the system was meant to prioritize them, something like that. And I know there is debates going on with the BMA about introducing something similar. I won't go into the politics of that on this video. But what it meant for me as a foreign trained doctor at that time, it meant that me and others like me had to have outstanding portfolios to stand a chance of getting on a residency program. So after I had, prepared my portfolio, I felt I had enough, impressive things in it. I thought I would apply. Now, I wanted to stay back in London, right? Most of my family is in London. And when I came to this country, I lived in London. I fell in love with London. In fact, my younger sister, who's been in this country longer than I, say I'm the Londoner. And she's lived in London much longer than I have, but she says I am the Londoner. I love London. I've walked not all around London, but I've walked around a healthy amount of London. They're just these fantastic parks and walkways, and you can just enjoy yourself walking miles and miles. I like to walk, I like hikes. So my plan was to do my residency in London. And when I was now ready to apply, there were no slots in London. Because whenever you're applying for residency, you also know how many slots there are and where slots are available. Because it's not every year that there are slots in every specialty program, right? Some years, depending on what you're applying for and what level you're at, there may or may not be slots where you want to work. And so when I was now ready to apply, there were no slots in London, and there were no slots in Kent, Surrey, Sussex, Essex, even the London adjacent places, there were no slots. There were slots in Newcastle, in Scotland, in Manchester, and a few other places, but there were no slots in London. And so I thought, okay, let's do it this way. I'll experiment. I'm very big on experiments. My life, in a sense, in a way, I run my life a little bit like an ongoing set of experiments. I'm very big on trying out things, right? And so I thought, okay, why don't I try and apply to get a place on a residency program, right? I looked at all the residency programs and I thought, okay, I like Manchester. Now, I know I'm supposed to be talking about how I got into career in preventative mental health, and I've gotten carried away talking about, my journey. But this is a live, and, on live, you have slightly more time, so I'll talk about it. And so, anyways, at the time, I thought, okay, let me just apply. I've never applied for residency here. Let me see if I can even get accepted. If I don't, it'll be good practice. The goal was that whatever happened, it was more like an experiment. The goal was that my real plan was I'd wait for the next round and apply when I knew that it was the August rotation, and there would be many more spaces, because the February rotation has fewer spaces. But the August rotation, there'll be many more spaces, and I would, almost certainly get my London place. That didn't work the way I hoped. I got into my first choice, because you've got to rank your choices. And Manchester was my first choice. Why? For a number of reasons. I think Manchester is a great place to train. And what I had found out at the time was that Manchester was a great place to train. I'd come to Manchester a number of times. I'd come here. I think, in fact, I came here for an MH gap training at some point. And it just seemed like, okay, if I can't train in London, then Manchester is an excellent alternative. And so I ranked my choices when I was applying, and Manchester was at the top. And I think there was a long listing and a short listing, and I got Manchester. And I'm like, whoa, okay, what do I do now? This was supposed to be practice. I really wasn't expecting it to go this well. What do I do now? Do I take this offer of doing my residence in Manchester? It was like a bird in hand, right? While London was, they say a bird in hand is worth 2 or 10 or however many in the bush. And so I had this Manchester offer in hand. Do I take this Manchester offer and start my residency, or do I wait and hope to get in with the August rotation? Now, I told you I was already doing a research assistantship type thing at SLAM, South London and Mod. Not SLAM, but probably SLAM adjacent. It was KCL, King's College London. So I was doing some research assistantships, and the hope was that if I could get a residency placement somewhere in that area, in the SLAM is South London and Maudsley. So if I could get a residency placement in that area, I could continue my research work with Melanie Abbas and team, and probably even do something that they used to call an academic, what do they call it again? An academic core training post. I think they call it an ACF, an academic clinical. I can't even remember, but people who have done it or have considered it would know what I'm talking about. Basically, it's an opportunity to combine your residency with research to a significant degree. But I had gotten this offer in Manchester, which was going to change everything. I couldn't continue my research role, with Melanie if I was going to be in Manchester. But then I thought, let me be pragmatic. I am an IMG, an international medical graduate, and the rules in Britain can, can change. The policies can change pretty often. And yeah, it might seem right now that it was relatively easy to get a place. But what about if, in a few months, there's some new policy that makes it much more difficult for me for whatever reason? And I just thought, I thought about it, I prayed about it, and eventually I said, okay, I'd take the residency placement in Manchester. So I moved to Manchester. And while I was doing my residency training, which was mostly clinical, I did my core training, got my membership of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, the MRC Psych. And then I also, went on to do, well, while I was doing my residency training, I kept on looking for opportunities to be involved in things related to public mental health, prevention and mental health. And then I came across a few opportunities. They were not always compatible with my residency training, but towards the end, I got to meet a public health consultant who was working in a mental health trust, and she was fantastic. Shout out to Jane Beanstalk. And we were able to sort of collaborate on some work. And following my finishing my residency, I went on to do some work, some clinical roles. And then a role became available, a role in population health, but for a psychiatrist. It was the first role of its kind that I was aware of. And it was a fixed term role. It was only a 12-month role. But I applied and I got it, and I worked in that role. And that role, in a sense, was almost my opportunity to hone my preventative mental health skills. Now, maybe in some other video, I'll talk about how I use that opportunity and others to build my portfolio to the point where today I proudly identify as a public mental health psychiatrist or a preventative mental health psychiatrist. And following that, when the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which I'm a member of, decided to integrate prevention into the residency training to a greater degree than it had been before, I got involved. Right. So I've done, and I continue to do sessions where I go to NHS trusts or to training days where I talk to trainees. In the UK, we call our we used to call our residents trainees. Now we're trying to call them residents, and which is funny for me because I came from Nigeria where we used to call people in residency training residents. And then I come training in the UK where we're called trainees, core trainees, specialty registrars. And I get used to this new way of naming people who are doing the specialization. And then recently they're like, okay, we're changing the name to residents. And so I'm having to reconfigure. So forgive me for, using the terms interchangeably, residents and trainees. So anyways, I, by the way, it's 2 minutes to midnight. I said I'd stop at midnight, but I'll just, talk till I'm done with what I'm saying. So anyways, where was I? Yes, I was talking about how the Royal College of Psychiatrists was integrating preventative mental health into the curriculum in a, more comprehensive way. What that meant was that, many trainees now needed to make sure they were meeting learning outcomes around preventative mental health. So I've been to a number of trusts, either in person or virtually, and done sessions on what they need to know, right? What are the new curriculum changes? How can you integrate preventative mental health into your career as a psychiatry resident, as a consultant psychiatrist? I've done sessions with consultants. I was fortunate to speak at the National Liaison Psychiatry Conference at the Royal College in London last year, I believe it was. And I talked about achieving prevention by collaboration, in a way that made sense for liaison psychiatrists. And so after taking some time, towards the end of my residency and afterwards to really upskill in preventative mental health, I am now committed to spreading the gospel, all right? And so anybody that will have me, I will happily go and talk about prevention in mental health, why it's important. And so there's the medical education side of it that I do, which is what I'm describing, where I, support initiatives. There's a public mental health certificate leadership course at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and I have helped facilitate, or I help facilitate on that course. And basically, people apply to come on the course, and they have a number of sessions. There's lots of self-study. They have a number of webinars with a number of experts. I happen to be one of the experts, apparently. And we just support them to think through some of the preventative mental health principles and how they can implement them practically into a career. And so, that's been a little bit about my journey to working in preventative mental health. Obviously, my consultancy is the other way that I hope to support individuals and organizations to think about preventative mental health and to implement changes in their lives, in their communities, in their societies, in their groups, in their places of work. But I'll round up since it's about midnight now, and say I'm really grateful to all those that logged in at some point or the other. This is my first live, and it's been an interesting experience. I think one thing I've learned is you don't go quiet for too long on a live. And so I'm learning that. And I'm really grateful to my friend Suzanne who logged on and engaged with me. Thanks so much. We'll catch up outside the live, obviously. And I'm grateful to the other people that logged on. I don't think I got their names, but I'm grateful. I'll end by saying I'll hopefully try this again. I'll try and give people more notice, and maybe I'll try and run a poll before it to see what I should talk about. But today we've talked about what's preventative mental health. We've talked a bit about recovery colleges. We've also talked about why people should invest in preventative mental health, why it should be important to you even if it's not your primary career. And then I've talked a bit about my career journey from medical school to being a public mental health psychiatrist. And so I'll end by saying this is Dr. Maggie Prevents. Remember, prevention saves lives. And remember, this video and any information in it does not replace seeing licensed healthcare professionals if you're struggling with your health in any way. But it's been lovely to see you subscribe, and I look forward to doing this again. Have a lovely weekend. Bye.